This video will go over powerful abilities and combos that were incredibly strong at one point or another in vanilla WoW. But this list will also cover more than just strong damage dealing abilities, and cover defensive and CC effects as well. At number 10, we've got kind of a meme combo in the form of the Paladin Bubble Hearth. You see, Divine Shield, the Paladin ability that gives him immunity to all forms of damage and debuffs, lasted for 12 seconds in vanilla. Hearthstone's had a 10-second cast time, so a pally who was in trouble could simply use Bubble and then cast Hearthstone to get out of anywhere. If a pally got caught out in the open world and was dying, they could just Bubble Hearth out of there. If a pally was mad at a raid, they could just pull the boss and then Bubble Hearth. It was the ultimate escape tool, and there were no ways to remove it in vanilla WoW, as Mass Dispel and Shattering Throw weren't added until later expansions. So, if a pally wanted to run away, there wasn't anything you could really do to stop them. Number 9, Frost Shock. Frost Shock is also another kind of a meme ability that everyone liked to call overpowered, but it kind of deserved its infamy to an extent. Frost Shock was one of the 3 shock shamans could use, which all shared the same short 6-second cooldown. And since 3 abilities all shared the same cooldown, Blizzard wanted to balance each one in a way that made you want to pick it over the other 2. Earth Shock had a baked-in interrupt, and was also kind of overpowered to an extent. Flame Shock just did damage and put a dot up, and Frost Shock did damage and slowed the target for 8 seconds. Oh, I'm sorry, did I say Frost Shock did damage? Because I meant to say Frost Shock did a lot of damage. It did way more damage than an instant cast spell with such a short cooldown really should have been able to do. Plus, it had a slow attached to it that was longer than its cooldown, meaning you could keep someone permanently slowed with Frost Shock. Frost Shock was one of the few ranged slows in the game that could do that, in vanilla WoW anyway, and the only one that also did damage. And in vanilla WoW where mobility was low, this was actually super powerful for that time period. So much so that Blizzard added DRs to slows in patch 1.4, basically just to deal with the Frost Shock problem. In case you were wondering, DRs don't exist on slows today. They removed them from that in the Burning Crusade. Slows were a much bigger deal in vanilla WoW, and shamans were one of the most mobile kiters thanks to Frost Shock. Number 8, Fear. Not just the Warlock ability Fear, but all fears. Fears in vanilla WoW worked a little differently than they do today. Functionally, they are basically the same. When used on someone, they run around randomly and can't use abilities. And in vanilla WoW, Fear had a chance to break early if they took damage. This is still the case today as well, only the damage threshold worked differently. Fear had a higher chance to break the more damage they took from an ability, and a low chance to break from small amounts of damage. So if you just put dots on a target and used a channeled ability, Fear was basically a 12-second stun. Technically, Hunters, Priests, and Warriors also had Fears, but only Warlocks had a spammable, no cooldown Fear. So if a Warlock got opened up on in PvP, they could have their invisible succubus seduce the target, turn around and cast Fear, then put up full dots and use one of their 3 channeled abilities to do a ton of small ticks of damage, and basically kill people through a near permanent Fear that would never break. Number 7, the Cheap Shot / Kidney Shot combo. Rogues could Cheap Shot out of stealth for a 4-second stun, and then combo into Kidney Shot for another 6-second long stun, for a total of 10 seconds of stun, the longest stun chain in vanilla WoW without some kind of special items or gimmicks. The only real downside to the stun combo was the energy and combo points required to use the 2 abilities, which could be completely offset through some items like Thistle Tea. A 10-second stun was enough time for a gear rogue to kill a low armor target, so it was technically possible for rogues to kill someone of equal level while never getting hit back in exchange, and with very little skill involved. A 10-second stun was powerful back then, and would be powerful today. Although this 10-second stun wasn't exclusive to vanilla WoW. It was a thing all the way until Cataclysm, when Blizzard finally put Kidney Shot and Cheap Shot on the same stun DRs. But it was really strong in vanilla WoW too, and the cause of lots of complaints about rogues being too overpowered. But funny enough, the thing that people associate rogues to, being able to CC someone to death without ever getting hit back, didn't actually involve the Cheap Shot Kidney Shot combo, which I'll get into a little bit more later on in this list. Number 6, Curse of Shadow and negative resistances. Before patch 1.9, you could cause targets to go into negative resistances with either Curse of Elements or Curse of Shadow. Resistances were a stat that would lower damage taken by their specific element and give you a chance to resist their effects. So having high shadow resistance meant you took significantly less shadow damage and could sometimes be immune to fear and other Shadow School debuff effects. Negative resistances basically did the opposite and caused you to do bonus damage to targets. So a warlock throwing up a Curse of Shadow on a target, causing their shadow resistances to go into the negative, they could hit them for double damage shadow bolts, which if they crit, could do a potential of 4 times their normal damage, which was basically a guaranteed one-shot to any player. This was so good that Blizzard just removed the ability to go into negative resistances in patch 1.9, as it was most likely a bug anyway and unintended. Number 5, Mortal Strike. Mortal Strike was one of the hardest hitting instant attack abilities in the game, which scaled with weapon damage. For those of you who don't know, some abilities scale with weapon damage, and weapons have varying levels of damage based on speed. So a fast weapon will do less damage than a slow weapon, since it hits more often. While a slow weapon will do a lot more single hit damage because it doesn't hit as often, and that's how Blizzard balances them out with each other. So with an instant attack like Mortal Strike that scales off the weapon's damage and doesn't care at all about its speed, you want the slowest weapon possible to make sure it could hit the hardest. And this is where the Arcanite Reaper came to fame. The Arcanite Reaper was a high-level blue weapon that was somewhat easy to craft and extremely slow with an attack speed of 3.8, making it a monster of a weapon for warriors. It was so good it even outclassed some epic two-handed weapons from Molten Core, despite being a level 58 blue item. So coupled together with Mortal Strike, a middle-of-the-road geared warrior could take out half the health of a player with 1 MS, and even kill Clothies with a crit. It was easy, effortless power, and very widespread with how easy it was to obtain the Reaper. But come patch 1.8, Blizzard normalized weapon attack speed, and brought Mortal Strike more in line and no longer overpowered with an extremely slow weapon. And on a side note, because of the widespread use of the Arcanite Reaper, it was used as the model for the heirloom two-handed axe we have today. Number 4, Blind Prep. Ever hear the infamous stun rogue who killed max level geared players while naked and using a starting zone dagger? Well, that infinite stun combo actually didn't rely on stuns very much, and was in fact so strong because of Blind. You see, Blind is an instant cast, long form CC that breaks on damage, and Preparation is an ability rogues have that resets the cooldown of all other rogue abilities. So what the naked rogue in the video did was take advantage of the fact that Preparation could also reset the cooldown of Blind, and the fact that Eviscerate did static damage and didn't scale at all with gear. So what he did was double cheap shot with Vanish and then Blind. He'd wait the full blind duration in order to leave combat and re-stealth, then Sap, and wait the full duration again for another re-stealth, since in vanilla WoW, Sap made you leave stealth. Then pop Prep to reset all cooldowns, and then do the whole thing again. After going through 2 full rotations of this CC chain, along with at least 2 cold-blooded Eviscerates, and a couple of other damage moves to build combo points, that's what allowed a naked rogue to kill fully geared players. And Blind was the crucial part of that whole CC chain, as Blind was what allowed the rogue to leave combat in order to use Sap, which allowed cheap shots DRs to disappear, and let the rogue save all of his combo points for Eviscerates. So it was really Eviscerate's static damage and Blind's cooldown resets that allowed the chain to be as effective as it was, and you could have someone CC'd for about 45 seconds straight if you did it correctly, of which only 10 to 12 seconds of that were spent in stuns. And because of Blind's incredible usefulness with a cooldown reset from Prep, Blizzard made sure all future versions of Preparation excluded Blind from being reset, starting with the Burning Crusade. And that's how Preparation has worked ever since. Number 3, Windfury Weapon. During 2 points in vanilla WoW, Windfury Weapon was kind of broken and overpowered. Windfury is a shaman weapon enchant that gave the shaman a 20% chance on hit to proc 2 extra attacks. Before patch 1.4, This proc didn't have an internal cooldown, so it was possible for Windfury to proc off the 2 hits generated from Windfury, and theoretically could proc off of itself forever until the target died. This was also the time period before attack weapon normalization, and since the extra hits from Windfury basically counted as extra attacks, they did insane amounts of damage from a very slow 2-handed weapon, like the Arcanine Reaper. There was even a famous video of a shaman going around with a legendary mace from Molten Core, one-shotting people with Windfury procs. Eventually though, Blizzard added a 3-second internal cooldown to Windfury, so it couldn't proc off of itself anymore, and killed it even further with attack speed normalization in patch 1.8. But in patch 1.11, someone discovered that the individual ranks of Windfury didn't share an internal cooldown. So if you dual-wielded weapons, you could apply the highest rank of Windfury to your main hand weapon, and then the second highest rank of Windfury to your offhand, and get 2 times the procs, which was pretty good. Until this too got nerfed, or fixed, in the Burning Crusade. Number 2, Will of the Forsaken. Will of the Forsaken was given to undead players as a racial with the launch of the game, when Blizzard decided to make undead players be counted as humanoid instead of undead, to retain some of the CC immunity that may have provided, as being classified as undead in the beta made them immune to a lot of CC that could only be used on humanoid targets, like sheep, and just made them immune to fears altogether. So what Will of the Forsaken did was break charm, fear, and sleep effects, as well as make you immune to those effects for 20 seconds. Now, 20 seconds of fear CC immunity is huge, and that was a downgraded version of what undeads could do in the beta, which was be permanently immune to them, which is why I can see why Blizzard left that in the game for so long. Eventually, Blizzard thought giving a race 20 seconds of immunity to 3 CC effects, of which one of them, fear, being heavily used in PvP, was a little bit unfair compared to the other racials. So they nerfed it in patch 1.6, to only make you immune to those effects for 5 seconds instead of 20, which was still powerful, but pissed off a lot of undead players. Someone took a screenshot back in the day of a list of reasons Blizzard thought players might be quitting WoW, and one of the options available was because Will of the Forsaken was nerfed, which was most likely a joke, but still kind of a big deal. Will of the Forsaken was always a strong racial throughout its whole life, and still gets nerfs even today, but it was at its strongest in vanilla WoW. And number 1, Pyroblast, or POM mages. Back in vanilla WoW, Blizzard balanced castable spells based on how long their cast times were. So the longer the cast time, the more damage the spell did. And Pyroblast had one of, if not the longest cast times of a single target nuke spell, clocking in at a 6-second cast time. It also had a 6-minute cooldown because it hit so hard. Now, arcane mages had this ability called Presence of Mind, which made your next spell instant cast, and worked on Pyroblast. Also, they had Arcane Power, which gave them 35% more damage for 15 seconds, both of which were on a 3-minute cooldown, and neither was on the GCD. So if you had 2 good, on-use spell power trinkets, because before patch 1.10 you could use multiple on-use trinkets at once, you could just macro in Presence of Mind, Arcane Power, your spell power trinkets, and Pyroblast to create one of WoW's very first one-shot macros. Except this one was literally a one-shot macro, and not just a clickbait burst macro. You could one-shot players with this macro, but only once every 3 minutes. Or I guess once every 6 minutes before Pyroblast's cooldown was removed in late vanilla. As far as damaging abilities go, this was probably the most overpowered thing, as it was a guaranteed one-shot, instant cast range nuke that didn't require skill, outside of getting 2 good spell power trinkets and creating the macro. Now for some honorable mentions, things I thought to put in the list but decided against for one reason or another. That's basically just Reckoning. It was a paladin talent that allowed a paladin to solo a world boss. I didn't include it though, because for one, it's talked about to death, and everyone would probably be expecting it. And 2, the big reason, it was only in the game for like a day or 2, and it was obviously a bug and an oversight. I guess it would technically count, so I'm adding as an honorable mention, but these other things, were actually used in the game for more than a day. Of course, besides that, there might have been some other things I probably overlooked, so if you know of any other overpowered abilities or things in Vanilla WoW that I might have missed, I'd love to hear about them down in the comments.